Many have heard about the Rendlesham incident. Anyone remotely interested within the UFO field of investigations is aware of the famous 1980 event. What people may not be so familiar with are the extremely strange and mysterious things that took place revolving around the event. And that's exactly what this amazing book by Philip Kinsella is about. Now, Philip is quite the guy, and we are going to get into a lot of things, a lot of high strangeness, a lot of weird goings on involving military cover-ups, reptilians, UFOs, and more. So buckle up and prepare for an epic tale of high strangeness. Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Evazine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off. Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Evazine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off. Blast off on another out of this world episode of the Hyper-Anomalous Esoteric Research Organization podcast, aka HEROparanormal, broadcasting from Space Wolf Research, just south of the Utah UFO Ranch in the Uinta Basin of Utah. My name is Ryan, the anomalous ambassador of the airwaves, bringing you a mysterious and strange episode today. On today's episode, we have Philip Kinsella. Philip is both a clairvoyant medium and UFO investigator as well as author, having had many bizarre UFO and paranormal experiences throughout his life, along with his identical twin brother, Ronald, who is a very talented artist, among other things. He began to research the phenomenon on a serious level of investigation after an alien abduction in 1989. This led him to writing several books, Reaching for the Divine, How to Communicate Effectively with Your Spirit Guides and Loved Ones on the Other Side, Believe, Bridging the Gap Between the Psychic and UFO Phenomenon, and Sky Crash. Throughout time, a continued investigation into the Rendlesham UFO mystery. This book had been co-authored with UFO investigator Brenda Butler. Philip, along with his brother, co-host a radio program for the Paranormal UK radio called Twin Souls, where they interview many authors and experiencers on all topics within the world of bizarre. Philip is also working on more books surrounding the UFO field of investigations. This won't disappoint. Philip, welcome to the HEROparanormal podcast.
Thank you very much, Ryan, for inviting me on board. I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you, Philip. You are an amazing author. You do amazing research. I'm always intrigued by everything you have going on. And this kind of brings a whole new, in my opinion, a whole new layer to the Rendlesham incident. What brought you to write the book, and can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yes, well, I had no wish to be involved with Rendlesham, of course. For your listeners out there, Rendlesham is known as England's Roswell. It was an event that happened at RAF Bentwaters in the winter of 1980 over the Christmas period, three-night period where military personnel had been witness to UFO activity, and some of which was at very close range. I had actually met and had dinner with Colonel Charles Holt. That was brought forward through David Young, who is a good friend, through one of his conferences here in England. So basically what happened was that I remembered I was quite young when the release of the story of the US military had encountered a UFO. Of course, at that point it was stated there were aliens that were seen, but I think that might be pushing it a little bit too far. But I remember reading it in the News of the World. And many years later, when I got involved with UFO research, I had the pleasure of meeting my good friend and good associate, Peter Robbins. And he suggested, when I was at this UFO group with my twin brother Ronald and Susan, a friend of mine, that we should go to Rendlesham because there's still a lot of unusual activity that's occurring within that area. And of course, a curious fellow that I am, I decided to go up to Rendlesham, which from where we live is about a 2-hour journey. And on our exploits within the forest, we discovered quite shockingly that certain paranormal events were still taking place. And would you believe that I ended up meeting, of all people, within the forest on one of our exploits that covered more or less 10 years of research, Brenda Butler. Now, Brenda Butler was the co-author to the original release of the book surrounding Rendlesham called Sky Crash: A Cosmic Conspiracy, which had been co-authored with Dot Street and British ufologist Jenny Randalls back in 1984 by Neville Spearman and Co. Limited. And I had no idea where Brenda Butler lived. I knew about her, not much. And when we were exploring the area on one particular night, we happened to come across her. And I saw her in the forest with a white German shepherd with another male, and they were playing some music and taking photographs. And when we passed them, I just felt I had to go back and speak to this lady. And I said, "Are you looking for the orbs?" And she said, "Yes, why?" And I said, "Well, I'm rather hoping to meet Brenda Butler." And she said, "My dear, I am Brenda Butler." And of course, yes, and of course at that point then, this can of worms was opened up with regards to much more information and data surrounding Rendlesham, Britain's well, as they call it, and UFO activity, paranormal activity, long before the main event of Bentwaters occurred in 1980, and afterwards as well.
What a coincidence. What a blessing to meet Brenda. She is a very celebrated researcher, and somehow this is something that tends to happen, these coincidences or synchronicities, it seems, revolving these events of high strangeness that are paranormal and UFO related. I think it's very interesting that you met on site. I mean, what are the chances of that? And what did you gather from Brenda's research, which in my opinion has been very extensive? Her book came out in 1984, is that correct?
That's right. Neville Spearman Limited brought their book out in 1984 as a hardback, and then of course it went to paperback. The cases of synchronicity occur, I think, within all of our lives, all of us associated with any form of UFO or paranormal research, and I think this is very interesting. Because this brings into effect the levels of high strangeness. And incidentally, I will boast here a little and say that I have a new book coming out this year called Terrestrial Trespassers, which deals with these levels of high strangeness, the greys, and the abduction phenomena, along with cryptozoology, the dogman, and Sasquatch. Now, Brenda Butler is a celebrated author, and I think as well as a researcher, and I call her the guardian of the forest because she knows the forest like the back of her hand, and we're talking about an immense space of forestry. Now, we had been witness to a lot of strange phenomena, and one of which, where we had summoned a UFO on the 8th of June 1998 at precisely 10:15 p.m. at night. And that was all due to listening to Karen Carpenter's, the celebrated American singer, who I love very much, her record Calling Occupants. And I thought, well, is that possible? So this then led me into looking at Brenda's research and discovering also that it wasn't just about UFO activities seen prior to the Bentwaters event and afterwards, but also another area of really strange, bizarre instance that concerned a reptilian man. And I couldn't believe what I was reading in her redundant manuscript, because she'd written all this second book out, a big, thick book that hadn't seen the light of day. And I said to Brenda, well, why don't we write about this? Why don't you let me have the manuscript? This is when we got to know each other very well. Let me go through your book and see what parts we can use in a new book. And that was when I started, along with Brenda, working on Sky Crash throughout time. Now, that book had originally been published by another publishing company we signed contracts with Capital Band Publishing Limited here in England, and that was subsequently published by our publisher John Day in 2013. Unfortunately, Ryan, the book suffered because a lot of people wanted to read about the 1980 event. They didn't seem to be interested in the fact of a reptilian man or experiments in summoning a UFO into the area, or other levels of high strangeness. And I think, in retrospect to that when we look at Roswell, for instance, with that UFO celebrated case, which I do believe did happen, and I say that lightly because through the release of the press, through the media, stating first of all that the army were in possession of a crashed disc, and then changing the story to a weather balloon, and of course it was that secret that the army didn't even know that it was floating around anywhere. So I mean, when you look at the evidence, it's staring you straight in the eyes. But I think that with any celebrated UFO case, whether it be Roswell or Skinwalker Ranch or anything like that, you find it a little bit dangerous to step onto the territory in terms of revealing information, because most people will ultimately reject that, thinking that no, only this one event occurred and no others. So this was the frustrating part. And of course, what happened some years later was that our mentor, UFO guru and UFO royalty, Philip Mantle, who runs his Flying Disc Press, asked me and said, would you mind if we release this book? And I said, Philip, you can do what you want with it, because, it just sat there and didn't really do anything before when it had first been published, because the publishers published so many books. The original publishers, Capital Band, it was like in a wheel. So it is frustrating, but Brenda certainly introduced me to the area, and incredible, absolutely amazing area. And I think also, Ryan, what's interesting through my research as well, indicative of what we've been looking into, is that these areas, most notably, if I may use Skinwalker Ranch in Utah, Bempton here in the UK, which Paul Sinclair, a good friend and celebrated author and researcher, is investigating, along with the Rendlesham Forest and many other key locations, these areas seem to be a nest for such strange and bizarre UFO paranormal experiences. So that's what we've been looking into.
Fascinating stuff. And it really does kind of remind me a lot of other areas of high strangeness. I'm glad you brought that up, because with this reptilian man story, I have to ask, do you believe that dimensional portals are present there in the area?
Well, this certainly does seem to be the case. I mean, like you, I'm a researcher and an author. I'm very grateful and humbled by a lot of the contacts and connections that I have with other top ufologists. Now, I believe that there is some kind of interdimensional process occurring here. And I've argued this in the new book that I've got coming out, as well as You, the Public Deceived. I did mention it in that book. I absolutely believe myself that we are dealing with some kind of interdimensional connection, perhaps ultra-terrestrial connection, portals opening and closing. And this is the frustrating part about all of this. We're not sure, candidly, about what exactly is going on, but at least we can create some kind of theoretical models. If we look, for instance, into cases of the National Forest, and I know that David Polite is celebrated with his Missing 411 series of books, but there are other researchers out there who have also explored this territory. In such places, you have UFOs seen, and of course you have the Sasquatch seen. You've seen the dogman there. People go missing, and those that are found can't remember where they've been. So Paul Sinclair here in England states categorically that location is the key. Now, we do know, for instance, through legend, that in Skinwalker Ranch there was a curse put on the land by Indians, and this created what they believe to be the Skinwalker. Whether or not the curse was responsible for that, we're not sure, because it appears that the land is sacred. So I think that, in terms of our understanding of the supernatural, and when we look at cases of Sasquatch and Dogman and UFOs, I mean, there is always this pervading silence that occurs in the appearance of UFOs or cryptids. There is also this fact of glowing eyes that are normally seen through the entities, as though they're able to come in and come out. But what's frustrating for us is we cannot try to pinpoint how it is that cryptids can connect with UFOs and vice versa. I believe myself personally that it's possible that if such intelligences are breaking through to our reality, and in this I mean UFOs, UAPs as they now called, same thing in my book, but whether or not they distort space and time, rather like a large vessel going through the ocean that upsets the water, allowing a distortion within space and time and allowing other entities to seep through from alternative dimensions. We don't know, but at least we can try to fathom what's going on here. So yeah, that is the frustrating part about it, most definitely, Ryan. Definitely.
Absolutely. So interesting. Something that I have to ask about is this purported alien activity. And we know, I believe it's John Burroughs and Jim Penniston.
Yes.
They saw this strange object. What's weirder, they saw physical hieroglyphics on the object. What do you think those were? What is your opinion of the hieroglyphics that were present?
Well, it was Jim Penniston who actually was the one who had more of the contact with the UFO that wasn't very large and had been rather like a triangular-shaped craft hovering a few feet above the ground. And what he reported was that there were these hieroglyphs, are absolutely correct. He started to draw them on a pad, and of course he became more sluggish, as though the energy or the emission of energy or the interaction with him touching the craft had somehow affected the way that he operated or consciously operated. His thoughts are very much that we were dealing with some type of time machine, because through his analysis of the description of the craft, there's no way that anything or anyone could be in it. So, of course, I'm sure you're aware he's written a book called The Rendlesham Enigma with Gary Osborne, and he's gone into a lot of great detail about perhaps indicating that we are dealing with people from the future that have come back to this time. But what we must also understand is that when the UFO phenomena comes into our space of reality, it alters our perception of reality. It alters the environment. So it's possible that the integration of this intelligence can infiltrate into the minds of all those around, and they will see different things. So to that individual, it is their truth. And we've been finding this. It's very fascinating. And of course, I believe Penniston and Burroughs. I believe Colonel Charles Holt. Ultimately, I do. His testimony is absolutely crystal clear. He's a man who's very much on the ball and key to information. So something did occur there. And with any event that occurs, whether or not it be Roswell or, Rendlesham or Skinwalker Ranch or any of these other celebrated areas, there's many others that are not well known. But you'll always get these levels where there ends up being distortion of facts and contradicting data. So, and then we get into this area of the OSI, the Office of Special Investigations, came in and mucked things up. I don't doubt that. But whatever occurred to those men truly frightened them. And, we're talking about military men. And I will state for the record here, Ryan, something that will make you laugh. Mm-hmm. The original testimony of some researchers was that all that the American troops were chasing was nothing less than the lights from the Orphanus Lighthouse. Now, when we had been there in the forest doing our research, we could see the sweeping beam of the lighthouse. It wasn't very strong. And I always state that if our good old American troops are chasing the lights to a lighthouse, then God help all of us. I mean, there were many theories about what actually occurred there, what was responsible, even to the most ridiculous, mundane. You wouldn't believe it. It appears to me that when someone states that this is something that's extraterrestrial, interdimensional, or ultra-terrestrial, it's a big no-no. It has to be something other than what you have seen. Now, for the record, the experiment that we performed on the 8th of June 1998 was incredible. And my argument is this: are we projecting this phenomena, or is the phenomena projecting through to us? Because it was clearly indicative that we wanted this to happen, and it did happen through observation. So, we have to look at both sides of the coin here regarding what we're really dealing with. And I don't think it's just physical spacecrafts coming from, say, Zeta Reticuli or the Andromeda star system. I think we're dealing with something that operates on multiple levels of reality. And I think that these multiple levels of reality are able to interconnect within us on an individual basis within our consciousness. And this is now where our research is leading us, not so much into the physical nuts and bolts construct of the craft. Of course, they must come into our airspace through this way. They must appear solid in order to be accepted and infiltrated into our dimension of reality. But we now have to look outside the box into other areas of research.
I find it so interesting that people believe, like you said, that they were following just lights. This is so unlikely, right? I'm glad that you mentioned that and I'm also glad you mentioned Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt, because these are all military men, educated men. They knew in my opinion, they knew what they were looking at, and the descriptions are very telling. Many of the things that Halt described are seen in other UFO cases, such as the dripping of some form of molten metal upon the ground. And my question to you is, do you think that this may have been something of a black project, or would you attribute it more to something more extraterrestrial, unknown, or quote-unquote alien?
Well, that is a very good question. And before I answer that, I will say to you that Brenda actually allowed me to touch a solidified piece of this residue that had dripped off of the original craft that Colonel Charles Halt had seen. I've actually held it. It's like a very lightweight, honeycombed, lots of speckled colors in it, and it can't be torn or dug into. It's been analyzed by several scientific units. Brenda has had them analyzed, and they are unknown material. And this occurred because Dot Street was small enough to break into the base, and had found this in the area of where the residue of the craft that Colonel Charles Halt and his men had seen. Now, in answer to your question, I'm not so sure. Now, if we go into the military aspect, my argument would be that what we, my brother, that is myself and Susan, had experienced on the 8th of June 1998 at 10:15 p.m. was a very structured physical craft, and it was incredible. And I seriously doubt whether or not the military had projecting some kind of holographic technology in order to, confound three relatively unimportant individuals who were in the forest at that time. So, I don't know. My argument would be, why would the military trick its very own military into this, psychologically twisting experiment? I have no idea. My gut instinct is that we are perhaps dealing with something that is definitely what we would call alien. I doubt very much whether or not this was some kind of military operation or psyops operation, although we have to be very open-minded, and I am with all forms of research. I will never put myself in a cul-de-sac with regards to this. We have to be open to everything. But there's a part of me, through what we had experienced, that tells me it is supernatural and also connected with some kind of alien intelligence. Now, the reason I say this is because on one occasion that we were with Brenda in the forest, and she normally takes groups of people out there, and in broad daylight, across a pathed area of the forest where there were no trees hanging above us, she told us about these stones that would literally fall from the sky, and they would be hot. Well, would you believe that on this occasion these stones did fall from the sky, and one of them plonked right in front of us, and Brenda said, "Go on, pick it up, you're going to find it's hot," and it was hot.
Whoa.
And that is some kind of apport. Now, we are aware that within UFO research, when UFOs have been seen around or directed around a certain area, that afterwards there is normally a lot of occasions, paranormal activity, discarnate voices being heard, stones coming from the sky, things moving around, poltergeist activity, this kind of thing, which seems very strange in terms of like the events of the UFO being seen along with occupants. That is totally, so indifferent to the poltergeist and paranormal activity. So, that's my terminology. I doubt very much that the military would or be able to create stones falling from the sky that are red hot. And in response to Brenda's request, along with the summoning of UFO that we did privately and within our minds, an experiment back then on the 8th of June 1998. So, I believe myself personally that we are dealing with something that is interdimensional and very multi-complex. Even to the point where a lot of researchers within the world can't fathom out what we're dealing with. although, as I said, we have ideas, we have our own opinions, but there will be, Ryan, some people who will tell you how it is and what it is. But I seriously have to kind of like step back and say, well, okay, I respect what you're saying, but, even we're not so sure.
Exactly. And I'm really glad that you said the word apport, because that is something that these things do appear from time to time in these areas, especially when having to do with UAPs or UFOs. And another thing that appears, and I have to ask you about this, is many people seem to claim that there was some kind of a cover-up and there were some orders to halt investigation and research in many of the dealings with this sensitive issue. Have you run into any threatening or interesting connections where people have been adamant in trying to stop your research in any way, shape, or form?
Yes, there was an occasion where I did find this with the writing of Sky Crash throughout time, when it was originally published in 2013. I make no claims. I'm not sensationalizing myself. I'm very grounded and very black and white, as you are probably very much aware. I don't deal with the fairies, so to speak. But yes, there had been some occasions where my computer had been hacked, and I was aware that information was being looked at. And I also had some difficulties with some very strange, bizarre people that were trying to halt or stop the publication of the book. Now, the book, in my terminology, is not something that's sensational. It recounts new information about Rendlesham, only in terms of the UFO activity before and afterwards. There was some sensitive cases concerning another character within the book called Karen, who had dealings with Brenda, and there was all this confusion about, Russia and the satellite, and all this type of thing that was, I think, fed into the main area, which tried, I think, to discredit the subject matter entirely. Now, what's interesting is that I was not perturbed by this, and of course, as you know, as a researcher yourself, someone like we're all important. I mean, I don't know what you would call me, but I just happened to get involved in this many, many, many long years ago, and find myself in this place like we all do. But my understanding is that I think the military are very much aware of the UFO, UAP phenomena. And as we all know, I think they've been exploring it for many, many years. I think when there is an event that's transpired, they want to find out as much as they can about it, because I think most of it still eludes them. I also believe that the subject matter has been considered top secret. I'm not just talking about Rendlesham here, although I will state that I think that the military themselves had tried to be hoodwinked into stating that it was something else. So there was a very much a force, especially with the Office of Special Investigations, who flew in, and then spoke to each of those members who were involved with the initial UFO contact that occurred over the 3-night period in the Christmas of 1980. But I think that the problem is, Ryan, on the larger scale of ufology, excuse me, is that the system that we serve is going to find it hard to explain to the public just what it is that we're dealing with. And there are several aspects that we can take with that. One of those is the fact that, we were led to believe that UFOs were nothing less than the figment of the imagination. The media cartel promoted all of these documentaries and then poo-pooed the subject afterwards. Most notably, the famous series here was Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World, that had been hosted by Sir Arthur C. Clarke, an eminent scientist and author. And he would burst that lovely bubble that had been made, afterwards. But is it true? Are they real? And then, of course, as we come into this new era of research in ufology, we discover the Pentagon releasing a somewhat flimsy 7 pages of limp information, but something quite revealing within its contents, that we could be possibly dealing with something that may be extraterrestrial. And then, of course, just recently, again, where strangely the media cartel here in England, I'm sure in the United States of America, in your great country, with those balloons and strange object that crashed, and I'm sure the balloons were terrestrial, but one of them may not have been. We can only speculate as to that. But stating on national television, on the news, that they had shot down UFOs. Mm-hmm. Now, that, to me, sniffed suspect, because each and every one of us, and sorry to divert from Rendlesham here for a moment, but each and every one of us know what a UFO is, an identified flying object, and through our terminology, our understanding, it is a spacecraft or alien technology. And there they were flouting, we've just shot down some UFOs, and I think everyone was quite shocked in the way that the media cartel had started to instigate this very strange admittance. So, I always say that there are these levels of high strangeness, and certainly within military organizations, and going all the way up to those people in charge of the media networks, they must know something. And I think that the time is coming now where there may be some kind of revelation on a larger scale with what we may be dealing with. But I think they're going to find it difficult. How on earth are they going to tell an already programmed society, I'm sorry that we've lied to you, and they have lied to us, all the researchers, all those people involved with UFOs and witnesses, but the UFOs are real. But by the way, we're going to find it very difficult to explain about them. So there we are. In a nutshell, there we are. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen.
Philip, I think many people found it very strange that the word UFO was used with those balloon/satellites. And speaking of satellites, I'm very glad that you bring up the Russian satellite having to do with this case, because there was a whole bunch going on. It was quite the mess when there was the belief that it was possible a Russian satellite, I believe, had collided with a UFO in space, bringing them both down. There was a Russian Tupolev bear kidnapped by the Americans and secretly flown back to the base. There was a lot of theorizing. Do you think an actual UFO may have been struck by a Russian satellite? This seems far-fetched.
Well, I doubt that very much. And to conclude here that the timing of the satellite was a little bit out of sync with the UFO experience that happened, I might add, here with the military over a 3-night period. Mm-hmm. So I doubt whether or not pieces of the debris of this crashed or saucer or craft or whatever it was, and pieces of our Earth technology just happened to be seen over those 3-night period. It's rather like going back through the contradictory data of the Roswell crash, of the military first stating that they had in their possession a flying disc. They made that fact, and then changing it to a weather balloon, as I stated again, so secret that no one was out looking for it. Mac Brazel a sheep rancher found pieces of the debris, and the rest is history. When it was brought to the attention of Sheriff Wilcox, and then he informed the army, and they went out to investigate. And in that episode alone, another researcher, Don Schmidt, who is a well-known author and investigator in Roswell, believes that a part of the Roswell craft came away from the main body as it came into a crash landing. And I believe that that is totally possible, as opposed to two crafts colliding with one another, two UFOs colliding. In response to the Rendlesham case, I think that a lot of occurrences were happening, and I think that the OSI and much of those debunkers tried in every way possible to denounce anything other than some kind of extraterrestrial vehicle, or vehicles, as it were. What's interesting is that when you speak to Colonel Charles Holt, he was Deputy Base Commander at the time, you will find that he is absolutely on par with his information. And even what happened with him stunned him, and his men, of course. They were all stunned by the events that occurred, and of course each of them was separated and spoken to individually. I know that you get some people, unfortunately, who are linked with the case, or believe that they were linked with the case at the time. I'm not going to go into the detail in that, but I believe Colonel Charles Holt, I believe John Burroughs and Jim Penniston, absolutely, totally, as I do believe Brenda Butler. And of course the story gets even stranger, because there was the appearance with Brenda around about 1984, and after Sky Crash had been published, their original book, with this reptilian man. I mean, I thought, well, this is impossible, but she actually befriended this being that appeared as a human and had also infiltrated top key members within the UFO community at that time. Even with Ralph Noyes, who was part of the Ministry of Defense, who had seen David Daniels. His name was David Daniels. He called himself David Daniels, along with Lieutenant Colonel Wendell Stevenson, America. And I have to state here that Ralph Noyes, who was part of the Ministry of Defense, wrote a science fiction book called A Secret Prophet that I have, that is based loosely along the lines of Rendlesham, because he thought that he could bring it out in fiction rather than fact, because no one would take him seriously at that point. I know that Jenny Randall thought the whole thing was a load of rubbish, understandably, with regards to his science fiction book. But not only that, but Brenda and this reptilian man, who, by the way, had no interest in the main events of the 1980 UFO occurrence in Rendlesham, actually went to go and meet Lord Admiral Hill Norton here in London. And that was an incredible meeting. So this strange being suddenly rocked up in the midst of Rendlesham itself. And so, but I interviewed those individuals, not all of them, because some of them are deceased now, or were, at the time that I started researching this. And I can assure you that when you are sitting in front of someone who is black and white and telling you that this is exactly what happened, and you're in the nest of that reality, it changes everything. So there's a lot more to Rendlesham than just the military's connection with these UFO appearances and interaction with some kind of extraterrestrial intelligence. So it's really quite fascinating. And, I don't want to go into too much detail about David Daniels, but the synchronicities get even weirder, because long before I had got involved with Rendlesham research, and when I had belonged to UFO group here and I had met Peter Robbins, our UFO group went to Rendlesham Forest to do a sky crash. This is many years before I went and got involved with the research. And we had stopped in a pub before we did our sky crash, not to drink alcohol, because that's a bad idea when you're sky watching. Mm-hmm. But we went into a pub, and there was this strange man that singled me, my brother, and Susan out, because there was a minibus full of us. And he came to sit with us, and he was blonde-haired, and he was casually dressed, but he seemed to connect with our minds. And my brother and Susan had seen one of his arm, I think it was his right arm, changed to some type of plastic. This guy we couldn't get rid of. He was following us into the forest afterwards, and he was getting into our heads. And on the way back from our sky watch, we didn't see anything, but everyone was talking about this strange man that called himself Joseph. And then, of course, when I read Brenda Butler's research, I said to her, my goodness me, I wonder whether or not this was one of the same individuals known as David Daniels. And she said, no, it couldn't have been. And I thought, well, no, I think that there's every possibility that this strange person was David Daniels, because this apparent extraterrestrial, or reptilian as they call it, had seemed to infiltrate a lot of people. So you'll find, Ryan, that when you get involved in UFO research, in a certain case, it's like going down the rabbit hole. But I'm telling you that I believe those people, and I believe Lord Admiral Hal Norton, I believed Ralph Noyes, I believed Lieutenant Colonel Wendell Stevens with his emails coming through to John Hanson, ex-CID here in England, along with many other prominent ufologists. So, it just gets really bizarre. Totally.
It really is bizarre, and I think it's so wild, the descriptions of David, and it sounds like there's another one out there as well, and some of the strange behaviors that would take place. Could you tell listeners a little bit about, for example, David's diet and some of his shape-shifting ability?
Yes. What happened was that David Daniels had sought out Dot Street just after Sky Crash had been published, their original book. And she wanted him out of her house, and he just appeared in her house, and Brenda had to drive a long way to get to Dot's. And, of course, she befriended him. But David actually proved to her what he was and showed her his true form. Brenda is a very grounded, very down-to-earth lady. Nothing phases her at all. And she was really enamored with him and connected with him and built up this friendship. Brenda had a caravan outside her property, and this David Daniels would stay in this caravan. And unfortunately, what they found was that whatever was going on in that caravan, because David Daniels didn't use any toilets, he didn't seem to clean. There was no cleaning amenities. There were no cleaning amenities there in the caravan, and he wasn't allowed in the house only once for a meal now and again. He was perfect, always well dressed, always well groomed, and this caravan, apparently all of the paint on the outside of it had dried crisp, which indicated to Brenda's then partner, Chris Peniston, who she was with at that time. He was annoyed because the being inside had obviously generated so much heat that it made all of the paint from the outside of the caravan burn up and turn crisp. He only ate sweets, and when Brenda had made a meal for him, he would antagonize anyone that was connected with Brenda by reading their minds. I mean, he could literally read minds very quickly and very, very clearly. And Chris Peniston, that was Brenda's partner at the time, I interviewed him, didn't like him at all and found him very frightening. In fact, a lot of people that came into contact with him wanted rid of him because he was just weird. He would seem to get into your mind. He would read your thoughts. No one knew exactly what he was after or what he was looking for. So, this strange being that used to wear a long black coat and like military, he looked like he was from the military. Brenda said he looked very handsome. There were no photographs of him. None were taken, unfortunately. But even when he got to America and connected as a father, David Daniels, to Lieutenant Colonel Wendell Stevens, who was in prison at the time, serving some time in prison. We won't go into that subject matter, but this Father Daniels started to get into the head of Lieutenant Colonel Wendell Stevens, and he was really quite worried about this because he didn't know who this man was, but he seemed to know a lot about Lieutenant Colonel Wendell Stevens and his family, I might add. So it's really bizarre. We don't know. Apparently, David Daniels, he informed Lord Admiral Hal Norton in their meeting with Brenda. Of course, when they went to the meeting in London to meet him, Brenda was searched, but he was not. And David Daniels had spoken to the Lord and told him that, his people on his planet were in trouble. And Lord Admiral Hal Norton stated, look, I can't get involved. My hands are tied. I'm near to retirement. I can't get involved with this. And he was talking back to David Daniels as though it was just some kind of normal conversation about interplanetary systems and difficulties with the environmental issues. Brenda Butler couldn't understand what was going on, but when Brenda pushed across a copy of Sky Crash, A Cosmic Conspiracy, Lord Admiral Hill Norton pushed it back and said, very strangely, if that has anything to do with the Americans, I want nothing to do with it. And Brenda couldn't understand what he meant by that statement. So it's clear to see that within the American and British operatives within the military establishments, of course, you have a division of powers, but there is a great deal of respect and unity between the USA and Britain. There always has been. But that statement was very strange. So I think that perhaps Lord Admiral Hill Norton was well aware, very much aware of the UFO situation, and all linked due also to another author, brilliant author, Timothy Good, who also was good friends with Lord Admiral Hill Norton and connected with him greatly. So, we understand that this reptilian seemed to have an agenda, but we weren't quite sure, no one was quite sure what this agenda was. He said that he had people with him that would come and visit Brenda, and they did. There were 2 ladies that came to visit her. And also that when things got really messy, Brenda realized that Scotland Yard were after him, along with the CIA. And this was true, because, apparently that this David Daniels was wanted for a murder for a body in London. And of course, nothing of the murder came to light. Nothing at all. So basically, David Daniels knew that the authorities were onto him and the authorities wanted him. Oh, I tell you what, Ryan, it's very strange, even to the point where Brenda, on one occasion, had taken David Daniels to go and meet another UFO experiencer, abductee, John Day, and his wife. And John Day had been involved in a very famous UFO case where they had gone through an abduction. Mm-hmm. Now, when David Daniels had met John Day, both of them started to dislike one another instantly, and they both recognized each other. And get this, not in this life, but past lives on different star systems. And David Daniels, this is the only time that Brenda saw David Daniels becoming physically and emotionally upset. She'd never seen him like this before, and she had to get him away from this meeting with John Day. So, I know this is taking us away from Rendlesham, but there are connection links to it. And the habits that this David Daniels had as well, too, was that he liked to steal books for some unknown reason. And he did say something quite interesting. He did map out within the forest certain ley lines, which he said that UFOs used as some kind of trajectory points within the Earth system. And Brenda still has those maps, those Ordnance Survey maps that he had drawn on, showing certain key locations of where UFOs come in and the grid systems which they use. So, to all intents and purposes, one would think that this so-called reptilian was almost childlike within his thinking, but very intelligent when it came to reading minds and infiltrating top key members within the UFO community. So, yeah.
I think it is one of the most interesting things about the case, this David Daniels character, what he would do, how he would act, and the fact that officials wanted David and seemed to be willing to do anything to get him, I think speaks volumes. And I think it is a very important part of the case.
Yes, well, I will tell you something else that was very strange. I went to America some years ago now to the Phoenix, Arizona UFO conference. I wasn't speaking there. I saw Jack Valet do an excellent talk and many other researchers, and it was really great. You Americans are so friendly and kind, and it was amazing. I had an amazing time. But Nick Pope had been there, and I'd met Nick and been on television with him on, I think, was it one occasion? Yes. Anyway, when we were ready to depart in our minibus going back to the airports after the 5-day conference, Nick mentioned about Sky Crash and about Rendlesham. He wouldn't allude much to this at all, but he did say something very strange when I questioned him about this. he said, when I asked him about David Daniels, he looked at me and he said, David Daniels. And his words to the effect were, yes, that was an interesting case, wasn't it? And he left it at that. He didn't say any more about it. And I would love to have known what he knew about it. You see what I mean? Because that would have aided within the research of information that I really needed. Of course, I think with 13, I think the book had been out then. I think it was out. Yes, I think. I'm not. I can't remember. But anyway, he did allude to that very strongly, and I thought, damn, I wish he could have said some more about that. But he didn't allude to anything other than that was an interesting case, which means that he must have known something about it. So you'll find that a lot of these mysterious cases, these mysterious incidents that occur within not just a celebrated UFO event, but the levels of high strangeness which come into the fray when looking into the subject. It's not just like, oh, this happened or that happened. You find that other things occurred. And this is very interesting. I doubt very much that David Daniels had anything whatsoever to do with the initial sighting of the military troops had experienced back in 1980. But it seems strange that he suddenly rocked up and wanted to find those who were involved with the original research. He actually went to go and see Jenny Rendles, and Jenny Rendles just thought that he was crazy and sent him packing. So, Jenny Rendles, Dot Street, Brenda Butler, and then, of course, all those people that, well, most of them anyway, that were key figures to the actual Rendlesham case itself. Not Jim Penniston or John Burroughs, as far as I know, or Colonel Charles Holt, or Lieutenant Colonel Wendell Stevens. No, I'm not sure about that. So, we're left scratching our heads as to the true purpose of what this so-called reptilians' purpose was.
And I find it so amazing that it's not just one or two people that talk about David Daniels. And I have to ask, has anyone become aware of his whereabouts now and have any information on him since all this took place?
No, absolutely nothing. The last that we heard, if memory serves me well, was that he was seen in Australia with a strange female, and the people on this tour that they were going on in Australia reported back to, I think it was John Hanson, perhaps also Lieutenant Colonel Wendell Stevens, that this man had been seen and someone tried to take a photograph of him, but it just came out as a light. Now, whether or not we had actually met, long before I got involved with the UFO research at Rendlesham, this guy who called himself Joseph, that was originally David Daniels, I am absolutely, totally convinced, and I'm not trying to put two and two together to make, 4 or 5, whichever way you want to see it, but I am absolutely convinced that that guy was this David Daniels. And people would say, no, that can't be possible. But you have to be there. When you're there in the event itself, when you are there physically in that presence or company, whatever's going on, you know. And I couldn't believe it when I read most of the parts in Brenda's book, because I'd never heard about this before. She kept it quiet. And then, of course, when you start digging and researching, you start to find all these threads that can interconnect with one another. So other than that, no, he just seems to have disappeared off the face of the earth. His craft, apparently, was secreted somewhere, but no one knows. He didn't allude to that fact at all. I do know that he said that his people were in trouble, if this is to be believed from his end, and that he wanted the people of Earth to help. But I don't see how they could, because, all of our infrastructures are multi-complexed and separated. So I'm not sure what he was after or what he wanted, to be honest with you.
And it does seem as if there is a similar cover-up or secrecy when it comes to the military and government's intentions with many of these events. Another question I wanted to ask you about is the night robbers. Can we go into that quickly as we wrap up?
Oh, you mean about the Greys?
Yes.
Oh, the research that I've done on them. Yes, the night robbers are the Greys, and my theoretical model of what they could possibly represent. One of the things I found interesting with regards to the Greys is their inability to reproduce. Now, I know that most people will say that they are AI technology, or that they are us from the future, or they are demons, or whatever. Fine, I am open to all forms of speculation, but at the moment we don't know. Now, it seemed interesting to me that the abduction phenomena seems to occur on a non-physical level of reality, but not so non-physical as in the sense that it just is all wispy. I looked into the near-death experience, and this had been published in an article I had done back in 1996 in Alien Encounters, a magazine here in England called Spirits in the Material World. I was interested into what the Greys were and why they were interested in reproduction. It seems strange also that the experience was likened to an NDE. If we take an NDE, a near-death experience, for instance, in the research there, when someone passes over into the light or onto the other side, there is a sense of timelessness. They feel more real and alive than they felt when they were in their physical body through this temporal extraction of the soul from the body. Beings communicate through it by telepathy, and there is a sense of loss of time. Now, the Greys seem to operate along the same premise, and I'm not saying that the Greys are the dead or, operating on the level within what we call the spirit world, but I believe that the mimicking of the Greys and of how they extract the true essence of an individual and bringing us into their filled frequency of awareness is very interesting. And whatever, for instance, they do to the astral body, which is real, will temporarily affect its physical counterpart. The same with an NDE. If the body is diseased and the person goes through the NDE and comes back, they're, in most cases, miraculously healed, as though there has been some kind of correction within the etheric body, as it were. So I always give the analogy of a mobile phone with us. You see, when we're looking at UFO research, we have to look outside the box. A mobile phone is merely the physical application that is there to receive a signal, and the application, the physical hardware, records and sends out information, translates it. And I think we as biological entities work on the same premise, where we are recording in this life information that's sent back to source once we've completed our journey. I suppose perhaps maybe to expand upon the process of creation, we don't know. But the Greys seem interested in our physiology and what makes us tick. And my argument was that perhaps if they had cloned themselves beyond that point of replication, like naturally, then they have lost themselves outside the frequency of creation. This is only one hypothesis. It could be possible that the Greys are here because they are engineering a new species, a new genus, because we as the human race are at the end of our line, rather like a modern-day Noah's Ark, as it were. We don't know. I mean, we have to be open to all forms of speculation regarding the Greys and the research that I have been undertaking. But there are other areas that I've looked into and I've kind of addressed within this new book called Terrestrial Trespassers. But I do believe that these entities, what we're looking at, is so far removed from our sense of reality that this is why we're finding it difficult to, understand what they are. Can anyone tell me where the aliens are? No, because they come in and out of our reality just like their UFOs, come in and out very quickly. So I think that they alter space and time and then make a deep connection on a psychic level with the individual, where an override is then initiated, and then contact is then ensued, where in most cases, the person is paralyzed. But they need the individual alive, awake, not alive, they're not dead, but in the sense of what I'm talking about, and in order to create this kind of this connection between the Grey and the human. So, I think and feel that, looking at it in retrospect to this idea, it's very fascinating. They're just theoretical models that we're working on, that I've been working on. And I think that, our understanding of the mind of consciousness has been limited through our programming from the system that we serve. And I think now the system is finding we have a problem because, there is admittance that these objects are real, although they're known now as the UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena, to make it more scientific within its approach. But quite what the system's doing, I'm not sure. It's very bizarre.
It really is. I really like the way you explained that. I really enjoyed this book. The artwork is phenomenal, and you are quite the artist. Can we tell listeners, as we close it up, where they can find the book, where they can find more of your work, purchase your art, etc.?
Yes. The book is available on Amazon because it was reprinted through Philip Mantle's Flying Disc Press. It's available as paperback, as hardback, as audio and Kindle. And thank you for the art. My brother does the art. My twin brother does the art. He's very accomplished within his department of the art that's been done there. And they can find out more about me and, of course, my identical twin brother on www.thekinsellatwins.com. You can get the books on Amazon. Well, everything is on Amazon today. It's the easiest place to get anything now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Instead of the old, audio book through the postal service or something, you just get it on Amazon.
It is scary. It's kind of really cornered the market of everything, as you said. It worries me, and I still like getting the physical books.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I must have the physical book. You hold your book up and you say, "Can you sign it?" No, not if it's a Kindle. You can't do that. It's a bit difficult. But I enjoy what we're doing. I enjoy the research. It's a challenge. I think that anything that affects you or you're touched by the singularity changes your concept of reality, and it just proves that the system we serve has lied to us, and that is the underlying factor. It has lied to us, and I think we want to know what's behind those lies and who is responsible. That is my job. That's what I want to do.
And yeah, I can't say enough about the artwork. Ronald, really, the way he had the reptilians in the book are among the best I've ever seen. And you guys are a dynamic duo when it comes to this, and very, very much respected in the field. I appreciate everything you guys do.
Thank you very much. And also you as well. Remember, we're all key players in this. We're all important, and we all work together as a team. At least I hope that most people do. That's the joyous part of it.
And I really have to say again that this is not just another book about Rendlesham, how it goes into all of the strange mysteries surrounding the event. It's really something that belongs on everybody's bookshelf and should definitely be checked out. Thanks so much, Philip.
Thank you very much, Ryan. I'm so honored, as always. Thank you.
Well, there we have it. What an amazing adventure through the mysteries surrounding the Rendlesham incident. Highly recommend this, and I also highly recommend you check out HEROparanormal.com if you haven't yet, and subscribe. There is a ton of content behind the paywall. You can also access that at Patreon. Just search for Hero Paranormal. And if you could, please like and subscribe on YouTube and share. That's the only way I've been told to break through the algorithm, which seems to shadow ban me. I know I won't be monetized on YouTube, but at least some people will be able to hear the podcast. Thanks so much for listening. Keep your eyes to the skies, feet on the ground, but don't forget to take a look around.
Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Evazine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off. Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Evazine. Blast off, blast off.